Oh, thank you very much, everyone. And we had a slight change of schedule. I asked Marcello if I could please open this conference because originally my abstract was going to be about something that Marcello and I have shared for 21 years. 21 years ago this year, I met Marcello at the second annual Biosemiotics conference. And for a good 15 years, Marcello and I worked together on that project. So originally I wanted to talk about two different views of meaning in life: Marcello's science of codes and biosemiotics study of signs. I use those words accordingly, science versus study. Two contemporary attempts at understanding the biological nature of meaning. But as I went to make the presentation, I realized this is actually a very short and small part of a much larger and much more important story that I feel is the right time to tell today, especially since Marcello and I, getting old, both had some health problems, and originally he was going to step down this year as part of the society president. He'll do that next year. The largest story that I want to talk about today, that this little part here is only a small part of, is really about what I think we're really here for. Marcello Barbieri, the true father of code biology. So I want to give you a little bit of Marcello's history. Some of you may know it, some of you may not. This is for the Padawans who want to get up to speed. And I also want to have this on the record forever. For Marcello is the true father of code biology. And that is not at all a small thing. Okay, so pardon me, I have to use two computers because of technical issues here. Okay. So, Marcello was born August 9th, 1940, in Carpenetti, Italy. He graduated from the science faculty of the University of Bologna with a degree in natural sciences in December 1964. He joined the Institute of Histology and Embryology at the Faculty of Medicine at the same university as a researcher in molecular biology and a teacher of biophysics. For medical students in the following year. In 1968, he discovered how to isolate fractions of ribosome microcrystals that were induced in chick embryos by hypothermia. In 1970, he was invited by Nobel Prize-winning molecular biologist Max Perutz to spend a semester at the Medical Research Council's Library of Molecular Biology in Cambridge, UK, where he made the acquaintance of Francis Crick, Hugh Huxley, and Aaron Klug, all of whom, like Marcello, were at that time applying the technologies of electron microscopy and X-ray crystallography in their attempts to better understand the workings of the cell. In 1971, EMI announced the first scanner for computerized tomography, and Marcello began investigating its algorithms for the reconstruction of structures from projections, which seemed to provide, and I quote here, new models for a mathematical simulation of embryonic development. Following this intuition, in 1972 and 1974, Marcello spent 2 semesters at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, where he discovered that the structure can be reconstructed from incomplete information, provided that the reconstructions are performed with iterative methods that use memory matrices and codes. And this suggested to him that organic memories and organic codes must be essential natural features of embryonic development. In 1979, his results were published in the Journal of Supramolecular Structure. And to this day, these are some of the biggest microcrystals of the eukaryote ribosomes that have ever been obtained so far. Equally importantly, if not more so, this work would lay the foundations for what would soon become code biology. Because again, as laid out very nicely in Marcello's code biology book, we can reconstruct a given artifact of any kind, providing we have enough information of the full end product, and we have enough projections to put them together in, say, 180 or 120 degrees of planar latitude. What we don't see in embryology, we don't have a full, the developing embryo does not have a full set of projections to call from, hardly. What it has is a matrix of memory, which is the genetic code, and a memory, structure matrices, which are provided by codes, right? So as we can see here in these illustrations, using only, I think, 12 projections with the appropriate memory matrices and the appropriate structure matrices joined by a code, we can more or less reproduce the original artifact. Marcello will go on to build this notion of codes in his next book, The Semantic Theory of Evolution, which was published in 1983. And you can see from the accolades on the back, scientists no less than Karl Popper, René Thom, and Carl Woese all said glowing things about this book. So much good and original thought. A marvelous book. The presentation is simply beautiful. The theory revolutionary. Barbieri attacks the great taboos of current biological thought with joyous impertinence. It reads like a novel. As you can see here, Marcello caught the interest of both René Thom, the famous Fields Medal mathematician, and the famous philosopher of science, Karl Popper. And both men wrote to Marcello to talk about his book with him, to say how much they enjoyed his novel approach. René Thom even went so far as to write the foreword for the first published version of the Semantic Theory of Evolution. And in turn, Marcello would later develop his three-world hypothesis based on Popper's three worlds, with the three types of semiosis: organic semiosis, animal semiosis, and human semiosis, all present a nested hierarchy of codes, starting from the most simple genetic codes to codes plus interpretation, which we see in the animal world, to codes plus interpretation and language, which we see in the human world, which we're going to look at in a little bit. The semantic theory of evolution, as revolutionary as it was when it came out, didn't get the kind of acclaim that it deserved. It would take decades before people would really be able to understand what Marcello was talking about, what he had seen that no one else had seen at this time. In 2002 or 2021, I believe, it was reissued as a scientific classic from the Routledge Library editions on evolution. Marcello's next book, The Organic Codes, was the book that perhaps brought him to prominence for most of the rest of the world. In this book, Marcello makes the pioneering argument that a code is an adapter between two different worlds. At the time of his writing, it was not known whether the DNA, the transfer RNA was a result of stereochemical necessity or whether it was truly arbitrary. It's since been shown that it is truly arbitrary. By connecting two independent worlds in an arbitrary way, we go beyond just the simple science of information and chemistry to one of information, chemistry, and meaning. Meaning are conventional rules. Meaning arises over time as natural conventions become emerge and become fixed. So Marcello showed the important difference between catalyzed assembly, which needs no adapter and which is simply a result of pure chemistry, and codified assembly. Codified assembly always needs an adapter, right? Again, an adapter somewhat similar to the tRNA, with two different ends, one adapting to the amino acid world and one adapting to the nucleotide world. And it's the presence of adapters which shows us that we are dealing with a true code. But it's not just simple DNA translation that we find codes, and Marcello was also foreseeing on this. Every element of protein synthesis, every element of gene expression relies on adapters, right? From the very splicing of the genetic code to later second messenger molecules and signal transduction. And in this move here, Marcello makes a very important point that unlike the tRNA, which is a single molecule with two different ends of adapting on it, adapters can actually be distributed across different entities, right? So here we have first messenger receptor, mediator, and amplifier, which together works as a transducing adapter to start a cascade of gene events in the cell. At every level of gene expression, at every level of morphology, we see codes. We see codes being operative. And these codes, Marcello, again, in his very far-seeing book, actually provide the basis for creativity and novelty in evolution. Because what we actually have is not so much the emergence of simple gene sequences, but the way these sequences are read. New forms come into being in evolution. Marcello's definitions of life are provided here in his earlier book. But the picture that he shows in this diagram here really shows a revolutionary new way of thinking about novelty, the macro events of evolution, right? From prokaryotes to eukaryotes to multicellulars to animals to vertebrates. Marcello makes the argument that is the generation of new codes that brings in new forms in biology. Right? And these codes, again, are conventions. They've become fixed through natural selection, but natural selection alone will not account for the kind of creativity and novelty. Natural selection would account for copying and statistical elimination of different types of copies. To get what Marcello is getting at here, you really need a diversity of codes. The codes are the things that give life its diversity. Out of the same 20 amino acids and 4 or 5 nucleotides, we find this great diversity of life, each of which can be explained by its accompanying set of codes. Around this time, around the publication of the Code Biology book, the linguist and anthropologist Thomas Sebeok was developing his own view of his own international research agenda, investigating the role of meaning in living systems. But Sebeok, again, was not a biologist. Sebeok was at most a biological dilettante. And he had taken a semester off to study animal communication. At this time in the 1980s, the major trends in linguistics and semiotics was the French structuralist school from Jacques Derrida, Julie Kristeva, Roland Barthes, all building on Saussure's notion of the dyadic sign. Sebeok felt that this was all kind of way too obtuse and abstract and based in human world always. He wanted to find out if the study of animal communication and animal ways of meaning-making could inform our own pre-linguistic ways of meaning-making. So he did a deep dive into understanding how animals could communicate. And here, for a presentation I did with something else, you see the kind of lineage that Sebeok's working in. Right? His whole concept of meaning is steeped in the humanities tradition. This is a chart, again, I made for another presentation, but you can see that his teacher was Roman Jakobson, Charles Morris. Morris was a student of Mead, who was a student of James, who was a student of Peirce. Ogden was a protege of Lady Welby, who was also a student of Peirce. This is where Sebeok gets his whole notion of meaning. Sorry, my notes are all over the place. In any event, Sebeok was hoping to find some kind of biological grounding for his work in animal communication study. But again, you can see that he wound up working in the tradition of Charles Peirce. And Peirce's quest, the problems to which Peirce's semiotic or theory of signs are addressed are two: to construct a naturalistic but non-reductive account of the human mind, and to explain and defend the claim that the sciences are objective in their mode of inquiry and in fact yield knowledge of an independent existing reality. So Sebeok, likewise, unlike Marcello, who's actually looking at how empirical biology works from the bottom up to see where the first notion of a meaning or a sign or a code would emerge from, Sebeok and his colleagues are trying to approach the whole concept from the top down. They were trying to take well-established semiotic theories and see to what extent those theories could help explain things that they saw going on in animal communication. And only much later did some of his more radical colleagues try to make the claim that the same type of processes must be going on in the cell. So Sebeok's project, like Peirce's, was not really about biology. Peirce is trying to explain how our science can be objective, a large issue in in philosophy of science and how something like human mind could come to exist. Very high-level concerns about a very late part of our evolutionary trajectory, human mind and science. These are the things that come in at the very last microsecond of evolutionary time. Marcello is looking at something much, much, much more basic, much more primitive, life itself, from its beginnings 3.5 billion years ago, to the codes that have been conserved since then, to the introductions of novelties that comes with new codes being introduced and then preserved. So for Sebiak, he wanted to, again, develop a philosophical view, right? That would answer the questions between realism and idealism. But this was all going to be done using philosophical theory. At most, if they could find something that would seem to indicate that this theory was sound, that would go into the literature. If it was not so found, that would not go into the literature. So again, this is a very different type of way of examining meaning than what Marcello was involved with. Nonetheless, Marcello at some point was asked to give a review. Sebiak had found the Estonian biologist Jakob van Uxel and his Umwelt concept, and they devoted a whole double issue of Semiotica, which is Sebiak's journal, to this resurrection of Uxel's work. Marcello was asked to give it a review, and Marcello quite rightly insisted that only using the empirical methods of science and the mechanistic explanations of science would the quest for biological meaning make any progress. So of course, as he's reported himself many times, he fully expected this to get rejected by Sebiak, but oddly enough, or presently enough, Sebiak saw the wisdom in this and accepted and published this paper such that Marcello Barbieri became involved in the biosemiotic project. So 15 years after the completion of the semantic theory, Marcello, again, after coming to the attention of Thomas Sebiak, wound up joining this group of philosophers, basically, and a few rogue biologists who were trying to, again, look at life's meaning making from top-down perspectives. And for 15 years, Marcello and I and some of these people worked together to try to develop something that would be able to bridge both ends of the spectrum. And in that time, a lot of good things took place, largely due to Marcello's incredible organizing skill and passion for knowledge and for disseminating knowledge. Marcello was fundamental in founding the International Society of Biosemiotic Studies, which continues to this day, as well as the Biosemiotic book series and the Biosemiotic journal. The series now has like 25 volumes. The journal, I think, is in its 14th year. And in the front page of both of them, Marcello Barbieri is noted as founding editor. But again, in the end, despite a valiant effort on both sides at the outset of the undertaking, the original underlying tensions in temperament and methodology proved irreconcilable. Now, if you look at the list of chapters in this first 2006 volume, including my own, and you compare the progress that's been made in each of them in 2023 with the progress that Marcello has made in his own work, I think it's pretty clear that Marcello's code biology project has come further than biosemiotics in developing a genuinely scientific paradigm for experimental research. 2, Marcello has continued to take the code biology just beyond just the level of analysis of the genes, now to the level of the brain, where the wordless neural artifacts of emotion are joined by neuronal artifacts of observership to create the first-person experience, which becomes worded through the cultural codes of language as it's distributed across human agents. And so again, in 2023, Marcello's far-seeing vision has been thoroughly vindicated. Back in the 1980s, when he's writing science's only 2 recognized codes were, again, the genetic code, and then 3.5 billion years of development, and the cultural linguistic code. By the time of Organic Code's publication, at least 5 codes were admitted by science, but notice that Marcello himself says here, the number of organic codes is likely to be much higher than the few examples reported above. And indeed, Robert Prinz's fantastic compilation of 237 organic codes to date, with many more to come, has more than vindicated Marcello's early intuitions and early work. Some 40 years after the writing of the semantic theory of evolution, science is now just beginning to see what Marcello alone was able to comprehend back then. He's been rightly feted in João Carlos Mejor's marvelous documentary as the true father of code biology, which is how future generations will remember him. Moreover, I'm happy to announce that as we speak, a new manuscript of Marcello's is under review for publication. Titled Codes in Evolution, The Origin of Absolute Novelties. I think even Marcello himself might not appreciate the aptness and the brilliance of this title, for his code theory itself is one of the few absolute novelties in science, like that of Darwin and Copernicus, and its potential for changing how we understand the world. Indeed, we who know him now know that Marcello himself is an absolute novelty. So let's pay homage to the man that, seemingly since childhood, could see what others could not yet see, and so was alone able to provide to science, 1, a new model of the cell, 2, a real alternative to physicalism, and 3, a new mechanism of evolution, all of which I have no doubt that all future biologists will soon be routinely taught in their textbooks. So let us now, while he's still with us, pay homage to Marcello Barbieri, the one and only true father and founder of code biology. Marcello, any comment?
Well, what can I say, Don? It's, I mean, we went up in the same way, then we went apart, and now we're coming together again.
Yes.
And, you know, I do hope that we will manage to go on together from now on.
Yeah.
And, you know, life is like that. You take on
different turns.
Eight, yeah.
Or infinity. Sometimes you move apart and then come together. But I think reading Marcello's latest manuscript, I wanted to make this point also. It's clear. Rightly, he stuck to his guns. Rightly, he would not be moved off his position, that the way to do this was with the standard methods of empirical science. This was the right choice.
Fact is this, though, Marcello. Let me just add one thing that, you know, I'm grateful for your presentation, for the fact, but code biology is more than just one person or one group of people. Code biology must become the biology of the future. So many more people must come in and join us. And that's what, that's an important point.
But this is, we disagreed on this yesterday.
No.
People would not be here today, Marcello.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe 100 years from now, maybe 200. You put these ideas out there, and it was your ideas to have these people here together today that will have the future people together. You articulated something that was in front of everyone's eyes, but as you said, they couldn't look for codes because they didn't think codes were real. Now we know. Now we can look. Now we're beginning to look. You saw it back then.
Okay.
This is why I say you are the father of code biology.
The important point is that every one of us is here, that we together continue. That's it. I mean, next year I will step down as president of the Code Society, somebody else will take over, and the story must go on. That's the important point. And so thank you very much for your...
You're most welcome. I just wanted to also say that even though there was a split, right? It's clear in your latest work that just being around those philosopher people is okay. So now you talk a little bit about Adolf Portman and Fuchskull and Stephen Cowley's notion of distributed language. It's fed your own thinking a little bit. And most importantly, even the concepts for people who cannot understand, you know, of ribosomal microcrystals, you coined some important terms that are going to cross science and humanities. Two that come to mind are natural conventions. This is an extremely profound idea of the natural conventions. Peirce was calling it a habit. Habit is a terrible word. Natural conventions is a much more rich concept. And the notion of nominable entities, entities that can't be quantified, but still can be spoken of. These are important concepts that are going to go beyond what happens in this conference, I think, and really become part of the vocabulary of both the sciences and the humanities.
So basically, the story is a bit like this. We had a marriage, then we had the divorce, and then we are married again.
We had a marriage and divorce, and both partners thrived. It was the right thing, Marcello.
All
It
right.
was the right thing.
Thank you very much, Don. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I have a 3-minute question. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say that I'm a philosopher. So philosophers seem to be incredibly puzzled about the hard problem of consciousness.
Yes.
And I have not ever understood why this problem is so incredibly hard. But when you understand meaning, when you understand neural codes already are not physical things.
Yeah.
They're already, right, something. So we're not reducing to physicalism.
Right.
This provides the mechanism
Yes.
for us to be able to resolve this problem with consciousness
Yes.
without being a Chalmers and just backing off. And saying,
Exactly. And they refer to something.
yes,
There's a realism to it.
that's right.
The codes are not, they have to have a meaning to them, right? This is what's beautiful about it. It really grounds the important questions, which were the questions C.B. and Peirce were looking for in real world science.
Absolutely.
I'm all for it myself,
Right.
but I still apply semiotics because
Yeah.
I love those people.
Yes. Of course.
Okay, so that's my time up. And now we're going to hear the real thing from the real man himself. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcello Barbieri.
Thank you very much. Okay.